Senator, you know how they say great minds think alike? Well, that is exactly what I have in mind.
The RFP for a new handgun was this thick. That's like shooting a duck with a howitzer.
Basically, we only have an 8-day supply if China, if we engaged.
In any other time in this town, prior to now where the news cycle is so fast, that would have been a scandal.
Roughly 60 seconds why you're qualified to be the Undersecretary of the Air Force. I just don't see how that makes you qualified.
That's what I want to hear.
The President made a day one decision to halt construction of the border wall.
Canada spent about 1.2% of GDP on defense. They're supposed to be spending 2%. It's really pathetic.
There's not one damn thing that anybody prepared for me that I'm ready to talk about because so many other things have come up that I want to talk about.
Could you please explain in roughly 60 seconds why you're qualified to be the Undersecretary of the Air Force?
Senator, I have a deep appreciation for our service members, and though I have not worn the uniform myself, I have been on the same team with them since I was 22 years old, and I have family members that have also served. If confirmed, I would work with officers and enlisted leaders to ensure that we're providing the best possible care and support for our airmen and guardians that they certainly deserve. I also wanted to share just a very short story. In 2010, when I was a career civil servant, I turned down an opportunity at the White House to serve on the National Security Council to deploy as a civilian advisor to Afghanistan because I believe that's where my country needed me the most at that time. And as a defense civilian, I thought it was important to understand what it was like to work in an operational command in wartime. In my over 20 years in defense, I have learned that civil-military dialogue is vital to provide the best possible options and potential solutions to the Secretary of Defense and the President. And in our democracy, Senator, we are fortunate to have civilian oversight of the military.
Listen, I'm trying to give you as much leeway as possible for you to describe why you're qualified to be the Undersecretary of the Air Force. Understanding the duties, and I'll read it pretty blank here, the duties and responsibilities responsible for the affairs of the Air Force, Space Force, including organizing, training, equipping both services for the welfare of approximately 700,000 active duty guards, reserves, civilian, and personnel, oversees an annual budget of more than $173 billion in direct strategies, policy development, risk management, purchasing of weapons, technology investment, and human resource management. I'm just looking for qualifications. You didn't give me any qualifications. You gave me your history, your story. But what makes you qualified to be the Undersecretary of the Air Force? We're at a serious, critical time right now in this country. And we need the best and the brightest. And I'm sure you're great, and I'm sure you're extremely bright. But are you the best to be the Undersecretary of the Air Force? I don't see it. That's no stab at you. I'm just saying that at a time when we're trading over transitions from future fighters, from aircraft, from weapons systems. We're getting transition out of the war of terror, going into conventional warfare. We're behind in a lot of systems that we're trying to get to. The Air Force plays a pivotal role in this. The National Guard is getting divested of aircraft on a daily basis with nothing in reserve for them to be able to pick up. That's a direct reflect to our homeland. And the Undersecretary is going to be involved in all this with decision-making. And I'm having a very hard time to see your qualifications on this. This is why I gave you time to explain it. And you go into a story about being on the same team and about, you turned down a position to another political position to be able to run in and do, to be, sent to Afghanistan, which I don't undermine that at all. I just don't see how that makes you qualified. That doesn't make you a bad person. I just don't think you're the best person for the job right now. And that's what we're looking for right now.
Dr. Schmidt, if confirmed, do you commit to ensuring that the testing office's report informs the public as much as possible about the problems that we need to fix in order to make sure that our weapons are safe?
Yes, Senator, to the maximal extent possible, indeed.
Right. That's what I want to hear. Defense contractors and even our military services sometimes have other priorities, like making the testing process faster or glossing over problems to keep these weapons programs on schedule. But the testing office is supposed to be an independent referee. If the testing office determines that a weapon is unsafe, you have an obligation to say that you can't recommend buying more of it, even if we've already spent billions of dollars on it, and even if the contractors are pounding on your door, pressuring you to give your stamp of approval. So, Dr. Schmidt, do you promise that you will come to this committee and tell the public if you conclude that a system is not safe for our service members to operate?
Senator, the independence of this office is crucially important, and I will do everything and work with you and your committee as much as possible to make sure we get the systems to the fight that work and safeguard our servicemen and women.
And you will come to this committee if you feel like there's inappropriate pressure on your office?
Senator, if I see inappropriate issues that I'm not able to address through my own means, I will come and discuss them with the committee.
All right.
In Missouri, and most places in the country, $130,000 is twice the amount an average family makes in a year. Under your watch, we were paying to store these materials $130,000 a day. In any other time in this town, prior to now where the news cycle is so fast, that would have been a scandal. But the idea that we're just supposed to wish this away now by saying it's not under your portfolio falls short. So either you knew and you didn't do anything about it, or you didn't know, which is what you're saying, until the letter came before you, and then you engage in your fact-finding mission, which perhaps is more concerning. And then after that, in the letter you say, well, we're mitigating those costs now. It's not $130,000 a day, it's $160,000 a month because we're selling this off. So to add insult to injury, by one account, one contractor, one company was able to purchase $4.4 million worth of steel tubes for just $156,000. Do you think, ma'am, do you think that's a good deal for the taxpayers?
Senator, you have my commitment for any resources that fall under my portfolio that.
Well, no,
I will
okay,
do as
forget
steward.
about your portfolio, what's in your portfolio. We've established that you don't take responsibility. I'm asking you, is that a good deal for taxpayers?
No.
Okay, and so now we're in a situation, and by the way, it's worth pointing out too, in the auction of these materials, it has been reported that they are purposely not to be referred to as anything related to Trump, Mexico, or the controversial border wall. So I think it's important for the American citizens to understand that this is being described to contractors on this auction, I guess, that they are referred to as steel tubing and sticks for industrial construction. Ma'am, do you think that is obfuscating what's happening here, of the selling off of these materials, to not be honest about what's actually happening?
Senator, I did not write the way that that was described, so I would have to defer to those that did. I believe that we need to provide transparency, certainly to Congress and to the American people, on all matters related to national defense.
So I think in my limited time, I just want to say, it's not personal, but I think what you're gathering from the tenor of these questions, you are being nominated for the #2 civilian position at the Department of Defense. That has enormous responsibility. And the idea that everything that's bad, or on such an issue of that is high profile, the American people want our border to be secure. They also want us to be good stewards of their tax dollars. Neither one of those things are happening. It's sort of the worst of all worlds. And now this administration is actually, I guess, starting to construct a border wall, parts of it. But the idea that your unwillingness to sort of account for this and take responsibility, to me, is a much bigger issue.
In recent war games, you've probably seen the outcome of recent war games that we have, showing that basically we only have an 8-day supply if China, if we engaged.
That's correct.
Is it concerning?
Very concerning indeed, yes. Yes, Senator.
Can you produce more?
I'm sorry.
Can you produce more? Are
In
we
my-
are we capable of producing more?
I'm sure, Senator, we would be capable of producing more, and my position, if confirmed, would be to make sure that whatever we produce is going to be survivable and lethal when used in combat.
Ms. Dalton, I'd like to also stay with the topic of current stocks of weapons to support allies or replace them as rapidly as we can with our new next generation systems we're needing for our own stockpiles. Two perfect examples are the Army Tactical Missile Systems, which is the ATACMS, and the dual-purpose improved conventional munitions, which is the DPICMS. Both are due for either replacement or disposal, but it took so long for them to basically be put in to use in Ukraine. Can you explain that or why it took so long to transfer that in?
Senator, thank you for highlighting the critical need for rejuvenating our approach to our munition stockpiles, given the multiple crises in which our allies and partners are engaged in around the world, and what that means for us going forward. I believe there's a lot of lessons learned that.
No, I'm saying your input right now. If we're going to get rid of, I'll use the PICMs. We have what the ATACMS. They're like 1.2 million. If we had stockpile, we were going to get rid of them. Took us a long time to get those back into where we agreed to send X amount to Ukraine, who needs them desperately. That type of decisions, knowing what we are going to deplete in a stockpile, we're not using them, we're never going to use them, rather than disposing of them, giving them to our allies who need them desperately. That's the concern. I'll give you another one. The aging unmanned aircraft like the MQ-9, the Reaper, they could be used as disposable assets to target ground ship-based Russian anti-aircraft equipment, which would allow manned Ukrainian aircraft a fighting chance. However, the request hasn't been taken seriously by the department. Has it been brought to your attention?
It has not.
In recent war games, you've probably seen the outcome of recent war games that we have, showing that basically we only have an 8-day supply if China, if we engaged.
That's correct.
Is it concerning?
Very concerning indeed, yes. Yes, Senator.
Can you produce more?
I'm sorry.
Can you produce more? Are we capable of producing more?
I'm sure, Senator, we would be capable of producing more, and my position, if confirmed, would be to make sure that whatever we produce is going to be survivable and lethal when used in combat.
Okay. Ms. Dalton, I'd like to also stay with the topic of current stocks of weapons to support allies or replace them as rapidly as we can with our new next generation systems we're needing for our own stockpiles. Two perfect examples are the Army Tactical Missile Systems, which is the ATACMS, and the dual-purpose improved conventional munitions, which is the DPICMS. Both are due for either replacement or disposal, but it took so long for them to basically be put in to use in Ukraine. Can you explain that or why it took so long to transfer that in?
Senator, thank you for highlighting the critical need for rejuvenating our approach to our munition stockpiles, given the multiple crises in which our allies and partners are engaged in around the world, and what that means for us going forward. I believe there's a lot of lessons learned that.
No, I'm saying your input right now. If we're going to get rid of, I'll use the PICMs. We have what the ATACMS. They're like 1.2 million. If we had stockpile, we were going to get rid of them. Took us a long time to get those back into where we agreed to send X amount to Ukraine, who needs them desperately. That type of decisions, knowing what we are going to deplete in a stockpile, we're not using them, we're never going to use them, rather than disposing of them, giving them to our allies who need them desperately. That's the concern. I'll give you another one. The aging unmanned aircraft like the MQ-9, the Reaper, they could be used as disposable assets to target ground ship-based Russian anti-aircraft equipment, which would allow manned Ukrainian aircraft a fighting chance. However, the request hasn't been taken seriously by the department. Has it been brought to your attention?
It has not.
I want to follow up on Senator Tulville's questions. It's actually worse than he said. The missiles that we're using to shoot down a $2,000 drone cost $2 to $4 million apiece. That's like shooting a duck with a howitzer. And we are woefully behind on the issue of directed energy. Dr. Ericsson, that's one of the areas where we have hypersonics and directed energy, we have lost the race, or we are badly losing the race. There is a ship now, to you, Dr. Schmidt, there's a ship called the USS Preble that has directed energy capability. It's in San Diego. It ought to be in the Red Sea. Don't you think the Red Sea would be a good place to test this ship right now rather than on who knows what in the Pacific?
Senator, I don't have enough knowledge to know what state of readiness that system is in, but to your point, the faster we can get these systems to the fight and make sure they're going to work when they get there, the better.
Well, my understanding is that this ship is in testing and training in San Diego, then it's going to Japan. I hope you'll take back to the department that maybe it ought to go to the Red Sea, so we're not spending $2 million for every bullet that we're firing at $2,000 Houthi drones. Dr. Ericsson, hypersonics and directed energy. We've got a lot of catch-up to do. This should be a hair-on-fire, urgent priority. Do you agree?
Senator, yes, I do. I'm always excited when I hear about hypersonics, and I'm hoping that maybe some of the technology we're developing at NASA, particularly with the X-59, if there's ways that we can infuse that and bring together the two different agencies, the Department of Defense and our agency, to maybe further that technology.
Well, the other piece is defense against hypersonics. That's another place where we've fallen down. Chinese hypersonic advantage renders a lot of our forward deployment strategy in the Pacific ineffective if we don't have a defense against their hypersonic missiles. I hope defense against hypersonics is a high priority as well.
Yes, sir. I will definitely, it's part of my portfolio to make sure we transition that critical technology early. And so I will work with across the departments to help us do that.
I'd like to see urgency here. Now, you've mentioned several times about small businesses. We've had testimony before this committee, and I've talked to a number of small businesses in the tech sector that have simply given up doing business with the Department of Defense. Too much bureaucracy, too much forms, too much time. So if you're serious about tapping the energy and inventiveness of our small businesses, that's got to change. And I would urge you to set up some kind of listening program to find out where the bottlenecks are, where the problems are. Why is a 12-person engineering firm that's onto something important simply not going to bother coming to the Department of Defense? Is that something that you think you might be able to undertake in order to try to find why smaller businesses aren't doing business with us?
Senator, you know how they say great minds think alike? Well, that is actually what I have in mind. I'm looking forward to having roadshows and opportunities to have workshops and to listen and learn. I understand that some of the problems that the Department of Defense has with their cyber programs are very similar to what we've experienced in NASA, and those are some of the things that we were able to do. So bringing those lessons learned to this community would be an asset, I think, which is valuable if I'm to be confirmed.
I urge you to do that, and would suggest you think about how do we make the fewer forms. How many pages have to be submitted? How big is the RFP? I don't have it with me, but the RFP for a new handgun was this thick. We've got to be thinking about setting reasonable requirements.
So in our meeting, you acknowledged that there is, in your words, some utility in employing barriers at the border. Is that correct?
Senator, as part of a system
Let's try
of border
to stick to
security,
yes and no.
as part of a system of border security management, in my personal view, I believe a border barrier can
So
help
wait, I'm just
mitigate the flow.
going back to in our meeting, you did acknowledge that there's some utility in employing barriers, correct?
As part of a system of border security management.
So I take that as a yes. So it should come as no surprise to anyone that employing barriers would help redirect the movement of large groups of people to ensure economy of force. And if Border Patrol was able to deploy more effectively, then DHS demand for DoD support would ultimately go down. And it seems that would be in everyone's best interest. Do you agree with that? It would be in everyone's best interest if DHS demand for DoD support would ultimately go down?
Senator, I believe that if DHS was fully resourced for its mission, its statutory lead role in border security, then we could reduce the demand on DoD.
And that would be good, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so it's why my colleagues and I are concerned about the administration's decision to auction off border wall materials rather than install them and actually help Border Patrol do their job. Now, I've been there. We talked about that. I've seen the materials feet away from the intended wall. So what really concerned me, though, was when I asked, given your border visits, whether you had either advocated personally for a change in policy regarding the use of border wall materials or even been part of any conversation internally to do so. And you stated, and I quote, "It's not my job to advocate for a change in policy. It's my job to implement what the administration tells me," end quote. Now, Secretary Dalton you've been nominated to serve as the #2 civilian in the Air Force. And that position demands independent judgment and leadership. So when faced with tough decisions, including the ones you may disagree with, are you just going to do what those over you tell you to do, or should we expect different?
Senator, the president made a day one decision to halt construction of the border wall. I am a member of the administration, and so I am part of the team that is implementing his policies across the board. The border barrier issue and the disposition of the materials does not fall into my portfolio. If confirmed as Undersecretary of the Air Force, my job would be to advise
I understand, but
Kendall.
you've taken it upon yourself to go on personal fact-finding missions, which you said a few questions ago. So I appreciate the latitude that you do have. I wish you would have used some here.
If Ms. Dalton is confirmed, I hope she will not do the same. Regrettably, her performance in her position gives me pause. While she has been at the post, the Department of Defense was caught flat-footed as a Chinese surveillance balloon traversed the continental United States and flew over military sites. When Congress sought more information, she, along with others in the department, evaded constitutionally authorized oversight. Nearly a year later, we're still learning new facts about that episode. I'm also concerned about Ms. Dalton's handling of the Pentagon's responsibilities at our southwestern border. At one point, the Department of Defense was spending $130,000 every day to store instead of use border wall construction materials. They had already been manufactured, they were ready, and yet we were spending $130,000 every day to store them. Meanwhile, illegal immigration broke records. Later, we found out that the Department of Defense had initiated a process in which these panels would be auctioned for pennies on the dollar, a clear effort to circumvent emerging congressional intent, as the Finish It Act was being added to the NDAA.
And at the end of DOD's disposition process to transfer these materials, there were exactly 14,795 steel tubes remaining. Do you know how much the taxpayers initially paid for these unused materials?
Senator, thank you for raising this really important challenge, which is the crisis at our southern border. In my time as Assistant Secretary, I have conducted regular visits to the southwest border to understand the strain that is being placed on our states, local authorities, and Border Patrol. And just in FY23, the Department of Defense has provided $608 million in border security support to DHS and counter-narcotics support to DHS and other federal departments and agencies.
The question would be, do you know how much the materials cost?
So for the specific materials, Senator, I know that in our August letter that was seeking to be responsive, collecting information from across the department, because this is not in my portfolio. I understand from the Defense Logistics Agency that at that time, it was $130,000.
Okay, that was to safeguard those materials. The actual cost to the taxpayers for those materials was $4.4 million. Based on the information that was provided to us by the Department of Defense, back to the original question, the materials were actually sold to a private buyer for $156,000. So I understand you're saying it's not under your portfolio, and yet you responded to a letter that was sent in regards to this. So I guess you can understand why the committee is having a hard time understanding how you're saying somebody else is in charge of this, and yet you're responding to a written request from Congress.
Senator, I was sent a letter from several members of Congress, and because I am a Senate-confirmed official, I take that very seriously. Although this issue is not in my portfolio, I went on a fact-finding mission with my team to collect inputs from across the Department of Defense, from those that have oversight and responsibility for this issue, in order to answer the
Okay.
questions that
I
received.
appreciate that. I am running out of time. So what I want our taxpayers to understand, though, is it seems that we have a number of different entities within the Department of Defense that are completely siloed. And while you're doing a fact-finding mission, across the board and going to other departments, you didn't take the time to question and follow up in a timely manner. It did take about 5 months to respond to that letter.
Did you feel responsible for the border?
I did, Senator, and that's why I've made repeated visits there.
So did you ever tell Secretary Mayorkas that he was doing a crappy job?
No, Senator.
So does it bother you that 70,000 people are dying of fentanyl overdose in the country?
It does, very much.
What'd you do? You sold off property. You didn't build the wall. We got terrorists come across our country. We got criminals across our country. We have many people coming unvetted.
Would you please share for the committee the role that the KC-46 are going to play in the Indo-Pacific as part of the broader national security strategy, and why these are going to be essential aircraft for decades to come?
Senator, thank you. And as you highlighted, the PRC is our most consequential strategic competitor, and it's with a great sense of urgency that we need to move forward to ensure that we're investing in the capabilities that can deter aggression and, if called upon, to fight and win the nation's wars. The fact of the matter is, in any given scenario, our tanker refueling capability is vital for us to be able to conduct and sustain operations over great distances that we may find ourselves in, certainly in the Indo-Pacific. And so I understand that the Department of the Air Force is moving out on the modernization efforts for the KC-46 and also to ensure the uninterrupted recapitalization of current capabilities so that we don't have a gap in being able to deliver for our warfighting capability. And if confirmed, you have my commitment to review that force design and to ensure that we continue to meet the moment in terms of the capability that needs to be delivered.
Your response regarding the spy balloon to Senator Rounds causes me to just want to drill down a little bit more. You said you clearly were in the value chain of advisors. When did you first learn about the spy balloon, and what was your initial advice to Secretary Austin?
Senator, Secretary Austin first learned of the PRC spy balloon on January 27th, and I learned about it the same day.
What was your initial
My
counsel?
initial advice was that we absolutely needed to understand what capabilities were on the PRC high-altitude balloon. NORAD, Northcom was tracking it and characterizing it, but we needed to get to the bottom of what it was doing, what its intentions were.
So here's the bigger question, given your role. Why was there never an internal review? Why didn't you initiate an internal review of all the policies, the processes, the siloing of the various, the intelligence agencies and NORAD and DOD and all of that? In the absence of that, we did it. This committee put in the NDAA a review. Did it ever occur to you, gee, this is something maybe we should dig into a little bit and see where our failings are?
Senator, in fact, we have incorporated that in the development of our Homeland Defense Policy Guidance over the last year. It was signed by Secretary Austin in December. It has benefited from the lessons learned from the PRC HAB experience, and there are ample lessons to be gleaned from that in terms of what we need to do for our air and cruise missile defense of the homeland, in terms of NORAD modernization, and a number of other elements that I could discuss in a classified environment.
But my point isn't that you didn't benefit tremendously from the review that was initiated by this committee and put into law. Why wasn't that instinctive to do that? And in answering that, as I go into my final minute, I would add to that, now that you've had the review, now that you've seen the review, now that you've thought about this and been challenged, what would you do differently if you knew on that date, December 27th, what you know now? What mistakes were made that you made, perhaps, in your counsel to the secretary that you would improve on?
Senator,
It's okay to have been wrong then, The correction is what we're looking for.
Thank you, and we are all human.
Right.
But I think the benefit of having the investments to come in NORAD modernization would allow us to better characterize these types of threats sooner, and then to be able to develop options for policymakers and certainly for the Secretary and the President. The other big lesson learned for me is that as soon as we have threats that are actionable, policy decisions before they are made public, or any other DoD activities that we owe oversight answers to Congress, that we need to provide that in a timely fashion. Again, I understand that we have fallen short based on what I have heard from members today, and we will incorporate that into our responses going forward.
Well, that's a common theme throughout all of the services, throughout, the entirety of my existence here for sure, is not getting back to us in a timely manner. But my point was more about the crisis itself. What would you do anything differently now?
Senator, I think that we as a community could have had better national level integration at the local level. What I saw in the early days of the PRC HAB was that we were very well wired for responding to hurricanes, to wildfires, and that is the day-to-day existence for defense supportive civil authorities. But it hadn't been since World War II that we had an incursion over U.S. territory from a foreign adversary. And so, getting that national to federal, state, and local integration happened. But I think in real time, we could have been more expeditious about it, and we will do so going forward.
Sure. Thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Emerging threats like hypersonics, unmanned aerial systems, advanced ballistic and cruise missiles, and we saw even slow-moving Chinese spy balloons, they're all going to come over Alaska first. Of course, I don't want them to hit my state, but I don't want them to hit my country either. So in terms of gaps in our capability to counter these...
Excuse me, Senator Sullivan, may I interrupt?
Yeah.
I have a call with the CENTCOM commander. I would now, at the conclusion of your testimony, conclude the hearing.
Okay, sounds good, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
And thank you all witnesses for your excellent testimony.
So I guess my main question is, how do we upgrade our domain awareness and ability to defend our nation through what we currently don't have in Alaska, which, as you know, is a big gap. I mean, we don't talk about it, but right now, hypersonics is something we're not being able to defend against. But a lot of that's going to take place in my state, as you know. Or A, do you agree with me? Hopefully you do. But B, what are we doing to close those gaps? And those are really important because the Air Force is going to play the critical role.
Senator, thank you so much for raising this vital capability gap, frankly, that I believe we have right now. This has been an area of focus that Commander Northcom and I have been digging into with regards to NORAD modernization, looking at how we can improve all domain situational awareness, how we can strengthen command and control, how can we invest in capabilities to deter aggression and be ready to fight and win the nation's wars, how can we be investing in research, development, testing, and evaluation. I know colleagues here at the table will also have a role to play if confirmed. We've developed a joint plan with the Canadians to help drive forward the combined or joint approach that we are taking with them when it comes to NORAD modernization. But frankly, Senator, far more needs to be done. And so I'm grateful for the support of Congress for the over-the-horizon radars. That investment, along with other capabilities, are going to be quite important for NORAD modernization, as well as the reauthorization of the Section 130I authority for counter-UAS. And just as a note, Senator, I had an opportunity to travel to Alaska last March and was really struck by the tremendous capability as you walked through. Had an opportunity to visit Eielson and see the considerable power projecting capability of the F-35s, Fort Greely for missile defense, and up to Clear Space for Space for the LRDR. And, Billy Mitchell's quote, I think, carries on in terms of he who holds Alaska holds the world. I was really struck to see a map, it's unclassified, that you can reach just about every strategic location in the world from Alaska within 5 to 10 hours. And so you have a commitment, certainly in my Homeland Defense role, and have confirmed as Undersecretary of the Air Force to work with you on these priorities.
Great, thank you. You mentioned Isle, Sinclair, Fort Greely. It's about 40 below in all those places right now, so it's tough duty too, right? So we need to support our military up there. I'm going to keep my word here to the chairman and gavel out here in a couple seconds. I do want to just get your commitment. When the NORTHCOM commander was here, he made a commitment during his confirmation hearing. When you talk about NORAD modernization, we have great allies in terms of Canada. The one thing, though, that Canada, to be perfectly blunt, and I asked them in a hearing just like this, has been not been good on is actually defense spending, right? And I got the commitment from the incoming NORTHCOM commander when he meets with his Canadian counterparts and in your NORAD role, I'd like you to make the same commitment to talk to the Canadians, say, hey, come on, it's a dangerous world, right? The United States can't be pulling the weight for everybody. Canada spent about 1.2% of GDP on defense. They're supposed to be spending 2% minimum as a NATO member. They consistently don't hit that. Their prime minister has indicated he has no plans to hit that. It's really pathetic. And in terms of North American defense, they often just rely on us. They don't do anything on missile defense. They rely on us. And I think hopefully, like the NORTHCOM commander, you'll commit to us. And this is a bipartisan issue, by the way. I was over at the NATO summit with 3 Republican senators, 3 Democrat senators. We hit all the leaders who aren't hitting their 2% commitments like, hey, come on, joke's over. It's a really dangerous world, folks. We got global commitments, the United States does, but the Canadians need to step up, and certainly in NORAD modernization. So if confirmed in those discussions, can you commit, like the NORTHCOM commander did, to have a frank discussion with the Canadians that it's, meet your obligation? It's only been 10 years at least since all the NATO leaders have said we're going to hit the 2% GDP. Prime Minister Trudeau thinks that was a suggestion, not a commitment, and it looks like Canada's not even close, and it's not good.
Yes, Senator, I commit to that.
Great. Okay, on behalf of the chairman, I want to thank all the witnesses and their families and supporters here. And for now, this meeting is adjourned.